from skyscrapers to suspension bridges, dominate our skylines. As you can imagine, these construction projects are built on plenty of blood, sweat, and cold hard cash. But they don't always turn out the way their developers anticipate. In fact, basic mistakes in multi-million-dollar projects can see new buildings abandoned, bridges destroyed, or entire complexes collapse. So grab your hard hat and hang on to your wallet as we take a look at some of the most expensive construction mistakes in the world. Galloping Gertie. Currently, there are over 600,000 bridges across the United States. Most of them are pretty old, too, with 42% of all American bridges built before 1970. Some of those have now been classed as structurally inefficient, but others never lasted long enough for people to realize. When it opened in 1940, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington cost $6.4 million to build. That means if it was built today, it would cost a whopping $126 million. At the time, it was the third largest suspension bridge in the world by main span. To put that in perspective, only the famous Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and the George Washington Bridge in New York City outspanned this mega project. With so much money sunk into it, construction workers were alarmed when, during the building process, the bridge began to move vertically in windy conditions. The workers continued to follow the design regardless, giving the bridge the nickname Galloping Gertie. Poor Gertie wouldn't be galloping for long, however, as just 4 months after the bridge opened to the public, it spectacularly collapsed into the water below. But how could such a collapse be allowed to happen? Well, Galloping Gertie was the first bridge to be built with large beams of carbon steel anchored in concrete blocks. Preceding bridges had typically used open trusses, a framework designed for structure support. The new design had the effect of diverting wind both above and below the bridge, resulting in a swaying effect. One day, the swaying developed into a dramatic twisting called aeroelastic fluttering. But on that morning, the bridge wasn't fluttering as much as it was flying. And so, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge went down to its watery grave. There were no fatalities, but the last person to cross the bridge, Leonard Coatsworth, lost both his car and his dog, Tubby. In addition to the $6.4 million blunder, Coatsworth was able to claim a total of $50,000 in today's money for all he lost. For 4 months of precarious bridge crossing, that's one seriously expensive bill. Demolition Derby. Until September 2021, Kunming, the capital of China's Yunnan province, was the home to 15 high-rise buildings owned by Yunnan Hong Real Estate. However, the volatility of the property market in China meant that the buildings, which cost 1 billion Chinese yuan or roughly $157 million, were left unoccupied for 8 years. After the construction company in charge ran out of money in 2013, the basements of these buildings were submerged in rainwater, causing irreparable damage. With maintenance costs rising and money on the project hemorrhaging, there was only one option left: a demolition derby. In the eye-catching collapse, the buildings were torn to the ground in just 45 seconds, using more than 6 tons of explosives placed at 85,000 blasting points. Man, $157 million is a lot of money to spend on one very big pile of rubble. Sampoong Department Store. In anticipation of hosting the 1988 Summer Olympics, Seoul, the capital city of South Korea, underwent an intensive period of urban development. One part of the project was the construction of the Sampoong Department Store. Originally intended as an apartment building, after construction began, future chairman Lee Jun repurposed the design as a department store. With the emphasis on commerce, not accommodation, gone were many of the design's support columns, replaced with fancy new escalators. When the original designer protested this would make the building unsafe, Lee Jun fired them. But he didn't stop there. The entrepreneur added a fifth floor to the design to make way for either a roller skating rink or series of restaurants. Floor space was prioritized in the rest of the building, with even more space meaning more commerce opportunities. All these changes resulted in a very unsafe building opening its doors to the public on July 7, 1990. Cracks had been appearing in the ceiling since its opening, but they were ignored by Lee and the managerial team. On the morning of the 29th of June, 1995, the cracks dramatically worsened. Store management failed to evacuate the building because, in a sign that was really all about cold, hard cash, the number of customers was unusually high. They simply did not want to lose out on the day's revenue. Their decision would prove a greedy and fatal error. By 5 p.m., the fifth floor ceiling was sinking in, and by 5:52 p.m., cracking sounds led workers to raise the alarm and evacuate the building. But it was too late. The main roof collapsed, the support columns imploded, and the entire south wing of the building pancaked into the basement. 1,944 people were injured, 502 fatally. The property damage caused by the disaster cost around $216 million at the time, which is a whopping $364 million by today's standards. And that's without including the compensation the unethical management were forced to pay to the victims' families. At first, the families asked for an average of $361,000 each, but were offered only $220,000. Payouts were completed by 2003 and had cost the owners $300 million in total. That included the entirety of Lee Jun's personal wealth, meaning, through his unethical construction process, he had ended up losing everything. And if you still ask me, that's still not enough. Hotel of Doom, North Korea. The answer to the question, what the hell? Of all the things that can be said about this hermit kingdom, no one can question the government's pride in its own achievements. In the late 1980s, North Korean authorities realized that while New York had the Statue of Liberty, Paris had the Eiffel Tower, and Rio de Janeiro had Christ the Redeemer, North Korea's capital, Pyongyang, was lacking a crown jewel in its skyline. To put an end to this, ground was broken on the Ryugyong Hotel in 1987. Designed to exceed 1,000 feet in height, house at least 3,000 hotel rooms, and include 5 revolving restaurants with panoramic views of the city, the opening was set for 1989. However, as the decade came to a close, the hotel was nowhere near completion. The external skeleton was finally completed in 1992. With the outer layers finished, perhaps the constructors realized that North Korea was a closed-border state which, let's face it, doesn't massively appeal to tourists, and left the inside empty. Windowless and cavernous, the Ryugyong Hotel has stood abandoned and incomplete ever since. In a bid to repurpose the blunder, the Ryugyong Hotel was first clad with metal and glass, before being equipped with LED lights that turn it into a light show at night. While admittedly it does make the hollow beast look rather fetching, construction work continues to stop and start, with the Hotel of Doom remaining the world's tallest unoccupied building. And that's before we even get to the cost. The estimated production cost for this desolate disaster is $750 million. That accounts for a whopping 2% of North Korea's entire GDP. So not only can the Ryugyong Hotel claim the title world's largest metaphor for a country, but also world's most pointless waste of money. World's tallest tragedy. Expected to reach a height of 3,281 feet and topple the Burj Khalifa as the world's tallest building by 280 feet, the Jeddah Tower was all set to be the pride of Saudi Arabia. The skyscraper would be made up of more than 700 residential and hotel rooms over 167 floors, with people moving through the tower on the world's fastest double-deck elevators, reaching speeds of up to 32 feet per second. if all that sounds too good to be true, it's because it kind of is. With a cost estimate of a bank-breaking $1.23 billion, construction began in 2013 with enough steel for 8 Eiffel Towers and enough concrete for 6 Hoover Dams. It was all going to plan, but with the completion of the 63rd floor, development suddenly stalled. The Jeddah Tower was supposed to open its doors in 2017, but several contracting issues led to a slight delay. Then, in 2018, all hell broke loose. A series of anti-corruption purges raged across Saudi Arabia, seizing billions of dollars in assets from hundreds of businessmen, one of whom was in charge of the Jeddah Tower. Ever since, there has been no progress on the tower at all. While the consortium funding the skyscraper has signaled its intention to complete the project, there is no confirmed end date. So, as it stands, the Jeddah Tower is unusable, unfinished, and unbelievably expensive. Who knows if we'll ever see the Jeddah Tower finished, but if it isn't, that's another $1 billion down the construction porta potty.